So, our next presentation is going to be with General William Clark. William Clark is the ninth child of George and Anne Rogers Clark and was born in the British colony of Virginia in 1770. Many of you know of him from the Lewis and Clark expedition. Afterwards, however, William became a brigadier general, a territorial governor, as well as superintendent of Indian affairs for the Indian frontier, based in St. Louis, where he now resides with his wife, Julia. So please welcome General William Clark.
Thank you. Well, greetings, everyone. My name is William Clark, so how many of you have heard of the Lewis and Clark expedition? Raise your hand. It's amazing. You know how many years it's been since we've returned? I think it's been 7 years now. This being 1813. It was 1806 we returned. Well, that's wonderful, though I wonder if there will be interest 200 years from now. There may be, on account of our journals and the well-documented record of our expedition. My maps, this map I finished in 1810, 3 years ago, and our journals. There were 7 of us, as I recall, keeping journals. 2 privates, all the sergeants had to keep a journal, and Captain Merriweather and I. These are some of the journals here. I have them all back in my possession except Ordway's journals, and Merriweather and I paid $300 for Sergeant Ordway's journals. Mr. Biddle has them. Nicholas Biddle in Philadelphia, Ordway's journals. I'm going to pass around the red one there. That is one of Lewis's journals. Here's one of mine. We never run out of ink or paper either. And I think we did a good job documenting and mapping our enterprise. But I must apologize. Some of you probably know that our journals have not yet been published. Well, Sergeant Pat Gass published his 6 years ago in 1807 without permission. It's for sale for $1, and it's been through 3 printings already. Have any of you purchased Gass's journal? Well, we were intending to publish our journals immediately, as soon as possible. Mr. Jefferson, our president, who dreamed up this enterprise, this expedition, wanted us to publish the journals as soon as we could. And that was going to be Merriweather's responsibility. Merriweather Lewis was the co-commander on the expedition. But as some of you probably know, Merriweather died 4 years ago, mysteriously, on the Natchez Trace. And he had not completed 1 word on the journals for publication. And that became my responsibility. Well, I went right to work. However, I did not feel adequate for the undertaking, and I sought help. First, I went to the United States Congress and asked if they would be interested in helping finance and be of any help to publish them, but they declined. So I went to Richmond, Virginia, and met William Wirt, W-I-R-T. He's an attorney there, and a fine writer. He's written the biography of Patrick Henry. But he said he did not have the time. So I went to Philadelphia and found Benjamin Smith Barton. He had agreed with Merriweather to publish Volume 3 of our journals, to be published in 3 volumes. And the 3rd volume would contain all our scientific discoveries of all the plants and animals that were new to us. Anyway, Mr. Barton, he pointed out a man named Nicholas Biddle, a young man in Philadelphia who was a fine writer, and I asked Mr. Biddle if he would be interested in helping me publish the journals. And he said no. At first, he wasn't interested. And finally, I convinced him to come by stage from Philadelphia to Fincastle, Virginia. That's where my wife's family lives. And I was staying with them, and I invited Mr. Biddle there, and he came by stage. And then I showed him all the journals, and he looked at them, and after not a long time, he was hooked. And he said, yes, he'd help me. And that was 1809. And he went right to work on our journals. And he spent 8 or more hours a day working on them. And I sent him George Shannon, a member of our expedition, to help him with any questions. And he had Ordway's journals to work with as well, and Gass's published journal. And as I say, he went right to work, and within a year he had our journals ready for publication. But the publisher, Conrad and Sons, went bankrupt, and then the next publisher, Bradsford and Inskeep, went bankrupt. But we have found another publisher, and I have good news for you that I think that next year I'm confident they will be available. We're planning on printing 2,000 copies, 2 volumes, initially, and they will be available for $6, the 2 volumes. So I'm hoping that we will be remembered in the long run. But I'm glad you're here. I've been asked to share some of my recollections of that enterprise. I often just called it the Missouri Expedition. Now it's often called the Lewis and Clark Expedition. I'm very proud of the expedition. It wasn't my idea at all. It was Mr. Jefferson's idea. He had been wanting to send someone, an American expedition, to explore this Missouri River for many years. And in fact, he had asked my older brother, George Rogers, 18 years older than I. Mr. Jefferson asked him to command this expedition in 1783. But my brother then asked Mr. Jefferson who's going to pay for it. We weren't in a position to finance such an endeavor. But when Mr. Jefferson became president in 1801, then he was in a position to see that dream of his come true, and he convinced Congress to fund this expedition. 10 or 12 men, he was thinking at the time, for $2,500. Well, I was asked to be a co-commander by Meriwether. I had met him in the Army years earlier. He was under my command at the time in the Chosen Rifle Company, and we became well acquainted then. But I had retired from the Army when I received a letter. I was looking after my father's estate. I had inherited it in 1799, Mulberry Hill, outside of Louisville. When I received the letter, and I wrote back the next day telling Meriwether I would gladly partake in this expedition. It fit in my interests with getting into the fur trade as well, which I am currently in with the Missouri Fur Company. I'm a business partner in the fur trade in that company. So I met Meriwether finally in August of 1804, and we floated down the Ohio River with the barge he had built, a 55-foot keel boat, and began recruiting men. And we spent our first winter still recruiting and purchasing supplies at Camp Dubois, just across the river from St. Louis, where the Missouri enters the Mississippi. And we drilled the men. There was discipline problems. Some of the recruits had not been in the Army and were not used to following orders, and would sass the officers, go off and get drunk. I remember the first court-martial we had, 2 hunters returned in December of 1803 to our Camp Dubois with a pig. They said they had found it hanging in a tree. And the next day the owner showed up wondering if anyone had seen his missing pig. Well, we said we hadn't. But I summoned those men. We had a little court-martial, and I let them off. I didn't have the lashes well laid on. We did apply the lashes, though, that first year. There were discipline problems. But all in all, we were a well-disciplined military expedition. We were a military expedition, you know. We finally launched and began going up this Missouri River here in May of 1804. And that first year, we were hoping to go as far as we could up the Missouri River and camp somewhere on the plains for the winter. And we made it to the Mandan and Hidatsa villages here, where we wintered. And then we were reckoning logistically the next year we would be able to cross the rest of the continent and reach the ocean and return all the way back home and be home by Christmas of 1805. We were gone a lot longer than we expected, and in fact, a lot of people thought we had perished. Any of you believe we had perished? Well, we ended up spending Christmas of 1805, you see, here on the other edge of the continent, not back in the eastern states. And we were delayed. I will refer to our delays. But first I want to tell you that first year wasn't very much of an expedition of exploration. The river had been well mapped already by James Evans and John Mackay. And we had their maps. Streams had already been named. That first year, much of our official business was diplomacy with the Indians, especially regarding this being our newly acquired American territory. When we had acquired that territory, Mr. Jefferson sent us further instructions about what to tell the Indians and questions for the Indians. A lot of diplomacy that first year. I remember we wondered if how successful it would be. Would the Indians be hostile or friendly? Well, let me tell you, we met around 50 different nations of Indians, and they were, for the most part, all of them, very hospitable. And it was very fortunate for us many, many times, in many ways. When we first met the Oto Indians, our first major nation of Indians to address, August of 1804, we, of course, had the men dress in full dress uniform and march. And we had them fire their guns. We had some small cannons we would fire. Meriwether had an air gun that she would pump up, and it was like a magic to the Indians how it could fire repeatedly. We, as I said, would have them march and fire the guns, and we would give gifts to the Indians, hats sometimes to chiefs. It was important that principal chiefs were at these councils. Sometimes they were not in the village, they were out hunting and wouldn't be back for days. And we were in a hurry. We couldn't wait for days, so we would appoint chiefs, and that was a mistake. We caused some jealousies. But we would give them hats such as this, and uniform coats as well. Because sometimes we saw principal chiefs, they were wearing the uniform coat of the British or the French or the Spanish. And we would try to convince them that to please their new great white father, Mr. Jefferson, that they should exchange that jacket, and we succeeded. We gave them flags of our country, certificates of peace, and the medallions of peace as well, tokens of our friendship and emblems of our growing empire. And then when we were through with the gift giver and the marching and such, we would deliver a speech. It was the same speech over and over again, and it took a long time to deliver because we didn't share language, you know. We had hired interpreters to help us communicate and translate either verbally or through the sign language. And we told them, "Children, we have come to inform you that you now have a new white father, a new great chief, and he is now your only father. Your old fathers, the French and the Spaniards, have gone beyond the great lake towards the rising sun, never to be seen again. Pay no mind to the bad birds, the British. Turn on your heel from them as you would from the precipice of a high rock, lest by one false step you should bring upon your nation the displeasure of your new great father, who could consume you, as the fire consumes the grass of the plains." We told them our cities outnumber the stars of the heavens. We told them to follow our counsels and you will have nothing to fear. For the Great Spirit will smile upon your people and see that you grow to outnumber the trees of the forest. That was a very long speech. That's just part of some of the things we told them. And I don't know if they understood what we were saying or the importance of what we were saying. On many occasions, when we were done with our diplomacy, the speech and the gift given and such, my goodness, I think I'm gonna... I usually don't wear this over my frock shirt, you see. If I got stuck, that would be embarrassing in the council. Well, as I was saying, when we were done with all that diplomacy, often the Indians would then ask us in their sign language. They'd ask, question, you... I did not know what this meant at first. Do you know what it means? They wanted us to sing. They wanted us to share medicine songs with him. And they'd ask sincerely, question, you dance? Well, darn right we'd sing and dance. That was no problem. We had two fiddlers. Pierre Cruzat was our best fiddler, George Gibson was the other, and we would direct the fiddle to be played for the Indians, and the men to dance and sing for the Indians. Meriwether and I, being officers, did not partake in this. But the men did a fine job. I remember them singing Amazing Grace, O Come All Ye Faithful. The French had the Voyageur songs. They all worked fine. And when they were through, our men singing and dancing for the Indians, they would sing and dance for us. And then when they were through, the men would sing and dance with the Indians. Pierre Cruzat playing the fiddle to the Indian drums, it was quite a sight and a sound. And they would dance into the evening, late into the evening sometimes. And I've often wondered why they were so sincerely interested in us singing medicine songs and sharing our manner of dancing. I think it's because we didn't need an interpreter. You know, we were strangers, they were strangers, and I think it helped break the ice. And maybe shed a better understanding of just who we were. And it's funny, Mr. Jefferson, he told us regarding the Indians, above all, establish trust and friendship. And I think the singing and the dancing that we did with the Indians was much more effective in establishing trust and friendship than that long speech of ours ever could have been. We didn't plan on that. The music would become an important part of our diplomacy, but it was. It was a saving grace. Well, we did quite a bit of singing and dancing, the more I think about it. Not just for the Indians, but for ourselves as well. You know, I never said so in the journals. I don't know if any of the men said anything in the journals about this, but we noted a lot of our sicknesses. But I never said I was homesick. I was. At times more than other times. We all were. And when we were homesick, the men would light up the fiddle and sing and dance among themselves. And like magic, that could lift us out of the Rocky Mountains and bring us all the way back to the hills of Virginia and dancing on the green. We did quite a bit of singing and dancing on that expedition, and I'm confident that we were the first federally funded transcontinental dance company. For the record. But if any of you had an expedition in the places unknown where you're going to meet people unknown, I suggest strongly that you bring some singers and dancers and such. Well, yes, that first year, a lot of diplomacy and singing and dancing. When we finally reached these Mandan-Hidatsa villages at the end of the fall of '04, about 1,500 miles we had traveled, about 15 miles a day up the stream. The men, like human draft horses, pulling the boats, pushing them, paddling them. We built a wintering quarters here, a stockaded fort with cabins, and we spent the winter there. I began interviewing Indians regarding the country to the west, it was uncharted, you know. Then this next year it would be a journey of exploration. We were trying to find a convenient route to the ocean for purposes of commerce and trade, a water route ideally. And I began interviewing Indians of ways across the continent. I'd interview them individually, and then I could compare what they were telling me. And they also began telling us about a bear. We had been informed that we would meet a white bear by traders coming down the river that first year. Told us we would encounter a white bear. We hadn't seen one that first year. One of our men apparently did. But here, the Indians, they warned us of the bear. They didn't just tell us about us. They warned us. But we weren't worried because we had superior firearms. But that next year, we sent the keelboat back down the river, knowing that the river would get too shallow for that big barge. And we waited for the ice to break up. That spring, April of '05. And I remember among the ice breaking up on the Missouri River were buffalo that had drowned. And they were floating in the water among the ice. We counted 50 a day on average. And the Indians, the young men, would jump onto the patches of ice in the river, out into the river, and grab and snag these and bring them to shore for food. And as we began to go up the river, these buffalo would also wash up on the shore of the river, and we would come across these carcasses, and there around the buffalo carcass were the tracks of this bear, twice the size of a man's track. And then we began to see this bear often along the river, this white bear. It wasn't necessarily white. We also called it the brown bear, the yellow bear. I called it the gristly bear. Meriwether called it the variegated bear. But always the same mood and temperament. When we began to meet this bear, we initially sent off hunters to sneak up on it and kill it, shoot it. And 6 hunters would go up. 4 of them would shoot it, and 2 reserving their fire. But what we found out quickly is that these bears become very agitated when shot several times. And they're very difficult to kill. We told the men it's best just to act defensively. Let's not attack this bear. It's not worth it. But we kept bumping into it, surprising it. But where we really bumped into the bear was when we reached the Great Falls of the Missouri. They're beautiful to see here. There's 5 cascades. But it was a problem. It upset our optimistic timetable of reaching the ocean. We were hoping there would just be 1 waterfall to portage around with our boats, but there are 5, and it took a month, not 2 days, as we hoped. We were delayed there, an 18-mile portage by land around the falls. But there at the Great Falls, we noted there, as we did many places, that there are giant, very large herds of buffalo. Thousands of them, thousands and thousands of them covering the horizon. Here at the Great Falls, they'd often come to drink. These big herds, or cross the river at the Great Falls. And we noted that when they did come to the river here, often as many as 12 of them would be swept over the falls. These herds being so large, they get pushed where they didn't want to go. And they went over the falls, and they would drown, and they'd wash up on the shore. So for that grizzly bear, this Great Falls, with this continual meat supply, I reckon was like their kitchen cupboard. And we set up camp in the kitchen cupboard for a month. There, we told the men to sleep with their firearms ready at their side at night. We, around our camp, we would typically have 200 to 300 pounds of meat, jerked meat, hanging on scaffolds to dry. 200 to 300 pounds. One night, a bear snuck off with 30 pounds of good fat buffalo suet. June 28, 1805. The white bears have now become so troublesome to us that I do not think it prudent to send one man alone on an errand of any kind, particularly where he has to pass through the brush. The bears were bold enough to come close around our camp every night, but have never ventured to attack us, and our dog gives us timely notice of their visits. He keeps constantly patrolling all night and barking all night. We didn't get much sleep because of the bears every night around our camp and that dog barking all night long. I noted the men in the daytime, they were so tired if they had a chance to lie down, they'd be asleep in an instant. Well, I'm glad to say that no one was injured by that bear. We were lucky in many times, and that was, I think, one of them. We did kill, I think, 43 of those large bear, and we'd boil the fatty parts of the bear down for the bear's grease. It's thick, like pig lard, even thicker than the black bear. And we'd spread the grease on our skin to lessen the severity of the biting insects, that thick grease. And we'd use it to cook with as well, the bear's grease. I think that was the most interesting animal and shocking animal that we encountered, new to us. And I have a lot of respect for that bear. The Indians think it's part human. I don't know, it is interesting. Have you ever seen a bear when it's been skinned? Anybody? They look hauntingly like a human. Well, that was an amazing animal. But I think also shocking, just as shocking, were the Rocky Mountains. We were delayed here a month, and then not wanting to go south, but wanting to go west. Nonetheless, the river took us south, as you can see, the Missouri, and delaying us further. We were hoping to find Indians in this stretch, the Shoshone we were expecting to meet. And we had an Indian woman with us of that tribe, with a baby, Sacagawea. But there were no signs of Indians all along the Missouri for months that summer. Well, there were signs. We would find moccasins, and we found a football that they'd play with floating in the river, and an Indian dog wandered into camp one night, and we would see smoke signals at times. And I'm sure we were being watched. But it was time to meet them. By the time we reached the headwaters of the Missouri, we had began naming heads of state on the headwater streams, the Smith's River for the Secretary of the New Navy, Robert Smith, and the Secretary of War's River, Henry Dearborn's River. And at the Three Forks of the Missouri, we had Albert Gallatin's River, the Secretary of the Treasury, and the Secretary of State, James Madison's River, and our President, Jefferson's River. We never did name anything for the Vice President. But as I recall, I don't think we were supposed to. Aaron Burr? Well, we chose to take this westerly fork of Jefferson's River. Still no sign of Indians, but finally Meriwether, with an advance party, crossed over a dividing ridge here. This ridge here divides the waters which flow to the Missouri and the Mississippi, and those which flow to the Pacific Ocean here. And we succeeded in beginning to acquire horses, which we'd need to go through the mountains. And we sunk our canoes in a pond near the river. We put rocks in them and sunk them in the water. And we dug some caches and stowed away some supplies. And we crossed the dividing ridge. I hurried ahead there with 11 men and the tools to build canoes. There were salmon in this river, and I believed we would be taking it to the ocean. And I named it Lewis's River, thinking we would report in the end that the best way across the continent is up the Missouri to Jefferson's Fork and over a 2-day portage to Lewis's River. And I hurried ahead to build canoes. When I reached the river, I met the chief, Cameoate, and he told me that this river is not navigable. You can't, it's too dangerous to float. And the mountains here are too rugged to cross. And he made a map for me, as often they would do, making the map in the ground, molding the mountains in the dirt or the sand, and drawing the streams, and telling me this bad news. I remember I had to go have a look-see. And I took 3 men, and with some horses, we traveled downstream, and here where it turns west into the mountains, it becomes like a river of no return. If you look at it, the water is very turbulent and foaming and confined among perpendicular cliffs right to the water. Well, I thought, half of our men can swim. So we will make boats, and we'll send those that can swim on Van Lewis's River, and the rest of us can go by land, and we'll keep in contact as much as we can. But I remember the president said, don't risk any lives unnecessarily. And if you'd see this river, I think you may have agreed that it was not a proper river to float on. So I remember, this is, in my opinion, the where the heck are we part of the expedition. In those Rocky Mountains, once you enter them, it's like a giant maze. There's not 1 or 2 ridges, they're good people. I think we crossed 60 ridges of mountains. Terrible mountains, tremendous, numerous, and steep and rugged. And snow in them most of the year. We were lost. My compass is of no use in a maze. Our sextant, latitude and longitude, is of no use in a maze if you don't know how to exit. And you're running out of time. Snow was beginning to fall in the mountains. And here we were in the middle of a maze. And, luckily, Camille told us that there was an old man in his tribe that knew of a route through these mountains. So I met him. And I decided to hire him. I sent Johnny Coulter back to Lewis with this message of my decision. And what I did was, it was a great gamble. I remember, I'm seeing it now, because I put the entire fate of our expedition into the hands of an old Indian. Well, he and his son succeeded. It was a good gamble. They succeeded in showing us on a trail through this maze of mountains, much of the time following ridges, way up. And he deserves a lot of credit. We called him Toby. He and his son showed us through the mountains. My goodness, we were starving in those mountains. If we had no guide, there's no telling what would have happened. We could have been trapped. The mountains nearly ate us alive. I noted our flesh was declining, going up this valley here in September of 1805. All the men's flesh was declining. We had run out of all our food, perhaps leaving too much at the caches at the Great Falls. But we struggled and stumbled out of these mountains, and we met more Indians at Nez Perce, friendly, and they provided us with a lot of food, and they agreed to keep our horses. We had 40 horses, including 1 mule that we had acquired from the Shoshone and the Salish, the Flathead Indians here. And we left all 40 of them there with Chief Twisted Hair. We branded them with a stirrup, shaved their manes, and built canoes, this time out of the long-leafed pine. The cottonwood tree is what we had been making our dugouts from on the Missouri, but when we floated to the ocean, we made them out of the long-leafed pine. The pine with the needles this long. And the Nez Perce showed us how to use fire to help hollow out the canoe. And this hardens the wood. And there's pitch in that tree. They were a fine canoe. And we floated to the ocean without much incident, reaching there in November of 1805 and building a wintering quarters. We named Fort Clatsop after the neighboring tribe. And we hoped a ship would drop anchor and we could get more food. We had run out of salt. We had a party of men continually boiling seawater on the ocean shore, producing salt. We were hoping a ship would drop anchor. We had a letter of credit from the president, Mr. Jefferson, giving us permission to purchase anything from any country. But I don't believe a ship did drop anchor. So we all had to return by land. If one had, we were going to as well send some of our journals and specimens with 2 or 3 trustworthy men back by ship over around under to Washington City. But we all returned by land. We were anxious to return home. We acquired all our horses as promised from the Nis Pierce and purchased 20 more from them and hired some Indian guides to show us back through this maze of mountains. We reached Traveler's Rest, I think, in the end of June of 1805, or 1806 then. We had spent some time here the year before, ocean-bound, now homebound. We stopped again at Traveler's Rest, because here we were going to split up the expedition, because we still were scratching our heads, wondering where the easiest route is across the continent to the ocean. This was a big objective of our mission. And we still had no good idea. When we returned to Traveler's Rest, we had determined we would split up the party to continue exploring. And Meriwether was going to follow this shortcut that our guide Toby had told us about the year before. Only 5 days to reach the Great Falls from Traveler's Rest, going up the Kokalaharshkit River, the river of the road to the Buffalo. 5 days. It had taken us 52 days the year before. So this looked promising. And Meriwether and 8 men and 17 horses said goodbye to me on July 3rd, 1806, at Traveler's Rest. And I, with the rest of the party and horses, continued back down the valley to explore the Yellowstone River, the Indians call the Elk River. And Meriwether and I agreed we would plan to meet here at the confluence of the Yellowstone and the Missouri. In about a month, we reckoned. Whoever reached here first would wait for the other. Well, all in all, it did work out as planned. Meriwether, unfortunately, though, had an unfortunate incident with some Blackfeet Indians, and also another unfortunate incident hunting with Pierre Crozat. When I finally met him, I reached there first. And Meriwether, oh my goodness, he was in a hunting accident. Pierre Crozat mistook him for an elk because of his clothes and shot him in the posterior, both cheeks. And Meriwether, when I finally met him again there, he was laid down in the bottom of the canoe. My friend. I tended to that wound, and he was up and walking again in a month. But let me tell you, when we met again here, it was only then we were able to determine what we could report as the best way across the continent. Only then, when we compared our notes, were we able to put an end to that myth of a Northwest Passage. There is no Northwest Passage, good people. Only then were we able to determine what to report to the president. Just a month before returning, finally we thought we had figured it out. I, as I said, was going to explore the Yellowstone, and did, wondering if this might offer the best way to the ocean. But what we determined and what we reported to the president, and we reported this in our report this day we returned, September 23rd, 1806, in St. Louis. We had already written this report about our success. And we didn't write up about how many plants and animals we had discovered new to science. That was not in the report. What we focused on was the commercial route we had noted and found. Because that's how Jefferson acquired the funds in the first place, when he asked Congress in a secret message to finance and support this expedition. He told them that it was for purposes of commerce, that it would be good for the economy. So in our report, when we returned, that's what we focused on, how what we had found out was going to be good for commerce. We told Mr. Jefferson we had found the most practical route to the Pacific. We told the president that our country should establish a fur post here at the mouth of the Yellowstone. And our country should establish a fur post here at the mouth of Mariah's River. Meriwether had named that for Mariah Wood, his cousin. And we told the president that our country could round up our furs at these posts around the middle of May, from whence they could be transported by land on the Indian Trail to Travelers' Rest and over the mountains, reaching these waters of the Columbia by the 1st of July. And from there, we told the President, these furs could be transported by water to the mouth of the Columbia, reaching here by August 1st. And from there, these furs could be shipped directly to Canton, China, and that emergent fur market directly. And, the British furs are going through Montreal, the long way. Well, that's what we reported to the President. But I can tell you that in the last 7 years since returning and giving him that report that not one American fur has crossed these mountains to the ocean. All that soft gold continues to come back down the Missouri and through St. Louis. And Henry Brackenridge has recently been telling people that Meriwether and I have discovered the very worst route possible to the Pacific. And he may be right. I'll be honest with you, we were shooting in the dark. I still don't know what is the most practical route. I'm very curious about John Jacob Astor's men last year. They returned from his post here of the American Fur Company by land in 1812, returned to St. Louis, and they had discovered on their way a pass. They're calling it South Pass, hundreds of miles south of where we went through the mountains. A very easy grade, less than the Cumberland Road, and hardly a mountain to be seen. The dividing ridge pass of the Pacific waters. I'd have to see this. And you reach it by the Platte River. Well, time will tell, I think, how the easiest ways across this continent. We did our best, and I'm proud of everything we did. We were very lucky. The Indians were very helpful. Well, anyway, now I'm back in St. Louis. I have to go back to my duties there, which are many. I've recently accepted to become the territorial governor of the Upper Missouri Territory. James Madison asked me, and I have accepted. So now I have double duty. I also look after the Indians as the superintendent of Indian affairs, and now I'm looking after the settlers and these conflict. And there's a lot of scoundrels in the fur trade, cheating and deceiving the Indians and putting the United States in a very bad light, and undermining a lot of the trust and friendship Meriwether and I had sought to establish. Scoundrels. I'm trying to stop them, and then the British are still a problem. I never trusted them. I'm worried they're going to compel our American hunters and trappers to leave this part of the continent, which is extremely rich in beaver. The British have been telling the Indians recently that I, representing the United States out west, that I am a child of the Pope, and therefore this country does not belong to me or the Americans. That's what the British have been saying recently. It's telling the Indians that our president is so poor he cannot afford food for his dinner table. Well, but do come see me if you come to St. Louis. I have a museum I'm building. It's a room 100 feet long and 35 feet wide. I'm calling it my Indian Museum, and it's full of objects from the Indians and of natural history. And I have two children, Julia and I. Our firstborn son, Meriwether Lewis Clark, is 4. And then Marianne is 2. And we have a new addition to our family as well. Our home in St. Louis, we have a new piano, the first in the city. Sent out by Julia's family from Virginia. And so if you come by, she might put on a little concert for you. Well, with that, I want to know if there's any questions. I have a question, Vernon. What time is it?
Yeah, just about 2 o'clock.
All right. Well, let me say thanks for everyone for coming out here. We get to have, coming up next is Captain Ron. Yes, sir?
Other than here, where have you had a chance to talk?
Yeah, my real name is Ritchie Doyle. I live next to Travelers' Rest State Park. It's kind of funny. Actually, and I've been presenting Clark for a coming on almost 9 years around the country. St. Louis, Smithsonian, that was really special, and the Museum of Natural History, and but mostly in Montana. A couple of weeks ago, I was dressing up behind the sagebush on the Missouri River, with the Lewis and Clark flotilla and canoes, and presenting around a campfire with coyotes, that interrupted. Sometimes I'm coming out of the woods, surprising campers on the Lolo Trail. Once I almost walked into the wrong camp, a Boy Scout camp. There were 2 Virginia Boy Scout groups up there, and I almost went to the wrong one.
I'd like to know what that grog is that you're taking.
Oh, sir, I have a distillery. And, I'll give you some. No, this is Culligan. This is Culligan water. Yes.
Sir, it's my understanding that you kept a complete journal, but Captain Lewis.
Oh, somewhat complete. Meriwether's was probably the most missed entries. Meriwether.
What happened?
We don't know if
to
they're
those?
missing, but a lot of the times when he wasn't keeping a journal entry, he was still noting scientific plants and animals. So it may be no big deal. I don't know if it's that big a deal. There was Clark and Ordway kept a journal every day. Lewis, perhaps wasn't delinquent. He missed a lot of days, but he was still, in those days he's silent in the regular journals, he's still making notes and noting plants. When he went through the Bitterroot Mountains when they're starving, he's not keeping a regular journal, but he's noting all the trees, and he's still making notes and documenting things. So what the heck? I think, Lewis, I don't think it's a big deal that Lewis missed a lot of days. Yes?
I've been reading the journals in Missoula. Published every day, and I'm interested in the spelling and the punctuation.
Well, yeah, there wasn't a dictionary, and Clark spelled phonetically, and I like that because he shows me how his accent. He reveals the way he spoke. Mm-hmm. But I just want to wrap up just saying that William Clark fathered a son with the Indians in this valley, the Flathead Indians, in 1805. And it's pretty well documented. And Clark fathered a son with the Nispears. And his Flathead son was baptized at St. Mary's Mission, perhaps by Father de Schmidt. And William Clark died in 1838 at the age of 68. He was still a federal bureaucrat and superintendent of Indian Affairs. And the last thing he did, officially, the week that he died, was he signed the passport of Pierre de Schmidt, allowing him to come out into the Indian country to work with. That was his last thing he did. So the Clark kind of has an interesting connection to this valley. This river here, the Bitterroot, Lewis named Clark's River. Clark had just named Lewis's River, and now he came here, and this was Clark's River. And his Nispears son was with Chief Joseph and the Nispears when they came through in 1877. His name was Tecumseh. He smokes during the day. And he was about 69 years old. And he made it to the Bear Paw Mountains when he was captured with the rest of the Nispears. And that son of Clark's died on a reservation in Oklahoma. We believe that William Clark probably did know of his 2 sons because in the 1830s there were delegations of Indians from this valley and Nispears that went all the way to St. Louis to acquire Black Robe missionaries. And they stayed with Clark. 2 of them died in Clark's home. Clark took them to the Catholic Cathedral and had Bishop Rosati see them. And they believe, Otis Halfmoon and Nispears believes that when these Indians met with Clark in St. Louis, they probably said something to the effect, we want you to help us find us a black robe. And by the way, you have a son among us, and he is a brave warrior. But Clark didn't. We have no record of Clark acknowledging, but I'm sure he wondered or perhaps even knew. Well, with that, I thank you, and stick around because Captain Ron Ghost is alive and kicking.